Bulasia, Bulare, Malombula, and welcome once again to the JustPeace Talanoa BURE at COVID-19. Here with Transcend Oceania and with the respect to the traditional owners of our land, those whom are present, and we also pay respect to those that have lost their lives at COVID-19. And in changing environment and climate, may they rise in power with our Creator. Together we welcome you to the Talanoa BURE with community leaders, inclusive of youths, women and men, engaging with our tradition of storytelling, a non-isolation of voices to amplify issues of vital concerns and change impacts. Mentamai ve Talanoa, da ve bosaita ina na ve ambimbi, ve enda and anonda vanua. To tell our stories, to reflect to what we hold values to our hearts and our vanua. First of all, climate change. More and more, study shows that it didn't just come from thin air. A reflection of these changes at pre-COVID-19, the pre-existing situation with the impacts of climate change, and now the changes brought about by the pandemic. Let us hear more from our guest of today, Ms. Grace Fox, a young woman leader from Nabavatu, a community leader, and Judge Nacewa, a youth leader, activist from 350.org, elaborating on human-induced practices with the extraction industries in bigger countries, for example, surrounding our Blue Pacific, and the emission impacts on climate change in smaller countries like Fiji and the Pacific Islands. Reaffirming a stronger commitment to influence a safer climate and a better future, a support to a just, prosperous, and equitable world built with the power of ordinary people. Join us at the BURE panel with our very own host, Paulo Baleinakorodawa, the Program Director, Transcend Oceania.
Welcome to JustPeace Talanoa BURE at COVID-19, a platform that brings together community representatives, leaders, women, and youth to share stories and priorities that holds value to them, their people, and their vanua. Through their experiences, there are lessons learned, there are recommendations and possible solutions and plans to the current situation. Here with me are Grace Fox and George Nacewa, both guests, and they are representing their own community, which they will talk about. Mbulavanaka, Grace.
Mbulavanaka, Paulo.
And welcome to this Talanoa. And Mbulavanaka, George.
Mbulavanaka.
Welcome to this Talanoa. So we will, in this segment, talk about what are the most important values in your culture. What do you value most in the different cultures that you come from? And what are some of those traditional practices that our older people in your communities value much about your culture? So you will introduce yourself a little bit, because I understand you represent a community to this Talanoa, and then you can respond to the question of what are the most important things that you value in your culture, and what are some of those practices that the older people value very much in your culture. Well, we shall begin with you, Grace.
Bulare, Paulo. My name is Grace. I am originally from the village of Vunisea in Reketi. However, I was born and raised in Nabavatu, which I'm also will be talking about some of the issues that we currently face. And I also wear another hat. I work for a local NGO that works in community development in Fiji.
And what's this NGO?
The Partners in Community Development Fiji.
Thank you. George, can you say a little bit about yourself?
Originally from Naronga, the village of Yabulo, but I've lived in Suva, in a small community which is about 15 minutes away from the main city, called Wailuku. I work for a regional organization called 350 Pacific, and that's part of a global organization which is 350.org. Yeah.
Thank you. So let's now talk about values. What do you value most in your culture, and what are some of those practices in your culture that the older people value a lot? Grace.
For in our community, what I think, and it's common across many local Fijian communities, is the concept of solsolevaki, social cohesion. That's something I found growing up. It was in little things, whether it was communal work or even between families. It didn't matter whether you were related by blood or. And in our village, in Nabavatu, there's also a lot of people from around Fiji. It's quite a central village, and there's also a lot of people that work. So there's a lot of indigenous people from other areas. So even with that, there was this.
So the concept of solsolevaki, can you just talk a little bit about what that means? What is it? I think it's a practice that's used in your community and maybe some other parts of the communities in Fiji?
Yes, I noticed. Our village is not that not in the interior. It's near the main road and accessible to many of the services around. And then one thing I found was that. Through solsolevaki, I think one of the values, one thing that we value in the village is education. So we would do that in support of someone pursuing further education. We would hold things together, a fundraising or any ways to help that person get through.
So it's working together as a community to support a need or a cause in the community.
Other than the occasional village work that happens on a monthly basis.
Okay,
that was,
thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Grace. George, what are the things that you value most in your culture?
Definitely something I value is respect, and I really like what Grace just spoke to about solsolevaki. And the community cohesion and community coming together for a purpose. And just where I live in Wailuku, during this pandemic, I work from 9 to 5, but then because of the Zoom calls with other partners, it goes till late. So I've always had my laptop working. And it's interesting that just the other day, we came home and the young gentleman that lives with us said, uncle from here and the young boys around the area came together to dig some plots to make a vegetable garden. We already have cabbage. Just the other day they were planting baingan, and they're looking to get some more seeds to plant, and just this concept of coming together and that selflessness, it just really speaks to the way we are as people. Yeah.
The whole concept of solsolevaki, many hands make work lighter. As I hear you talk about it, it seems like that's the concept that you value, both of you, in your culture, and you were just beginning to talk about respect, which I think is linked to what you've been talking about earlier. Let's leave the conversation there, and we will come back to the second segment. You are watching Transcend Oceania, Talanoa BURE at COVID-19. Don't go away. Join us after this break. Welcome back. Thank you for joining us in this Talanoa. And here with me in studio is Grace Fox and George Nacewa. So in the previous segment, we talked about the values that you value most in your culture, and you were talking about solsolevaki and respect. Let's move the conversation forward to begin to talk about now what are the key issues of concern that you have in your communities. But also talk about what are some things that have changed. You grew up in these communities and you've started to see how life is lived in your community, but a lot of things may have changed, and so you need also to talk about that. So let's talk about the issues first. What are the key issues of concern for you and the people of Nabavatu, even your the NGO that you worked for, Partners in Community Development, Grace?
Nabavatu right now has been, the villages have been moved to a new site because there has been, since last year, just after TCS, it battered the village. And as they were still recovering from that, TCN happened. And a part of the village that was on a low-lying end flooded. The village also sits by the Narrated River. And the flooding, all these years I've been there hasn't been any issue of flooding. And then, so that happened, TCN, and then just a few weeks after that, visible land cracks, big ones, appeared throughout the village. So then when the Ministry of Mineral Resources came and identified it as no longer safe for settlement, so they had to move the villages out immediately.
And that's where they are at the moment. It's a relocation to a
Yes,
to a
it's
new
a temporary site.
Have they thought about going back to the old site?
Some of the villages remain. They refuse to leave the village, but then there are no talks of moving back.
That's really interesting that you're saying, they refuse to leave. Why do people refuse to leave when there's danger already, around, but they still refuse to leave?
I believe it's because it's okay, but we don't have, there's no material wealth. I think our connection is to our land, to our ecosystem. And this site has been a relocated site. So I remember our elders used to talk about moving from the former site, which was by the Narrated River. So this would be the third resettlement of the village. So
the difficulties associated with how we are connected, the people of Nabavatu and Narrated connected to the land which they live on. And then earlier on you talked about there has never been any flood like the one that happened last year during Cyclone Ana. Yeah? What do you think has changed that has brought about this flooding that never used to happen before?
Again, climate change. We used to, I've heard about it. It was just a concept until, for some of us, it's a concept until it happens to you. Then you believe it's real.
So you believe it's
real.
Climate change related.
It's climate change related. And also, I remember growing up, we've had cyclones, but there was none as devastating as the most recent one. So it was a minor one.
Thank you. We will come back to you, Grace. George, what are the issues of concern for you? You have an organization that you work with, but also in your community. And maybe link in what has changed since you were growing up and noticing the shift in the community you live in.
I remember growing up in Wailuku. We are just a few meters away from the river, a waterfall. We used to go swimming every weekend, picnics by the river, go fishing. But now you see there's a dramatic change in the landscape with soil erosion, sometimes that maybe because of the drought, that the water levels are really low. And in all my years that I've lived in Wailuku, I always thought that it was just, I never connected it to climate change. But then working in this organization, 350 Pacific, we understand that these impacts are caused by massive or huge emitting countries that emit a lot of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and also extractive industries. When we talk about extractive industries, we're talking about extractive industries that extract coal, fossil fuel, which they burn for energy. And I mean, these bigger countries do all of this, and we in the smaller island nations face the brunt of it. So these extractions have impacts here in the Pacific, and at home in Wailuku, I see that even now with all the massive floods or even the soil erosion that's happening.
So it's real, eh?
It's real.
When I hear you, George, I What's coming out loudly is climate change is caused by something else. And you're talking about emissions and all that, but emissions is also caused by something else. So let's get down to the root of this. Who's causing and what's causing climate change? Any one of you want to respond? Grace and George? Yeah, George?
I believe that it's human-induced. It's because of the burning of fossil fuel that we here in Fiji are facing the brunt of the impacts of climate change. But then it's these people in these bigger countries that rely on that source of energy. That's why we are.
Okay, very good, George. Grace, do you believe that the cause of climate change is really human beings?
Yes, definitely. And then with what George has explained, and the sad thing is that little communities, little islands, communities like mine, tend to feel the full brunt of the impact of climate change. And then with the situation too with us, with the new resettlement site, and then with the issue of COVID-19, we were grateful that just a few weeks back there was no cases in the north, but then there is now, and with people, with families crowded in tents, that too is also an issue of concern.
Thank you. So the conversation is now getting interesting because you're getting into some of the real issues of concern that's similar for you, George, but also Grace, it's real for you. You were watching Transcend Oceania's Talanoa at COVID-19. Don't go away. Join us after this break. Welcome back, and thank you for joining us in this Talanoa with Grace Fox and George Nacewa. So in the previous segment, you started to talk about the issues of concern for you in your communities, but also in your organizations that you work with. What have been some processes or some things that both your organizations are doing to address the issue of climate change, which both of you have talked about? And also, what are some of the recommendations you'd like to put forward? There's viewers who are listening in tonight from different levels in society, but for your organizations, for young people, what are some of the recommendations that you would like to put forward? Also bearing in mind that the whole world is preparing for COP26. So, would you like to start, Grace?
Paulo. So you were talking about processes. The organization, the local NGO that I work for, Partners in Community Development Project, we've been working with rural local communities, with trying to empower communities, because our communities already have the skills, the knowledge, the capacity. We're just building on that. We're trying to get communities to lead their development processes, and I believe that is the way forward for our communities. Rather than relying completely on the government of the day to support the development works.
I like your concept of empowering the community, which I think is saying that the communities already have skills and knowledge. Your role is then to strengthen their capacity to be able to address the issues that you're talking about.
Paulo. And then, because that way too, communities can take ownership of their own developments and take full responsibility. When you compare to some of the community development projects that used to happen before, organizations, stakeholders come in, give the funding, and then they leave, and then after that the
so in this way you respect the wisdom of the people, the capacity that they have, and you work with that. Thank you, Grace. George.
Say thank you for sharing that, because that's I think in the work that I do, that we do as 350 Pacific, is really changing the narrative around that we are mere victims of climate change. You know, we are just waiting for handouts. But really, what we are not done. We are fighting. You know, we are resilient people, and Grace spoke well to that. And that's just such an amazing thing that's happening on the community level. You know, and the work that we do as well is on a global scale is really ensuring that the extractive industries, those fossil fuel companies, don't get finances from large insurance companies or large banks. So we do campaigns around that to cut finance flows to these extractive industries, because, you know, we believe that if we stop it at the root cause of climate change, we are protected here, you know, and we protect our people. Yeah.
That's really very interesting, George, when you, because that the change in narrative, I've heard it somewhere, that you are changing the narrative of people in the Pacific drowning to people standing up and fighting, that we are not weak, we are fighting. We are fighting to keep us alive, and then you rope in the concept of resiliency, that we are people that are resilient, because we've been knocked down so many times by cyclones, disasters, and all that, but we get up again and we continue living. I really find that interesting. Would you like to say a little bit more about Pacific people being resilient?
Yes, I mean, classic example, Grace spoke to the impacts that the village has faced from Yasa and Ana, TC Yasa and Ana. And it's just such a beautiful thing to see after all the devastation, people coming together, you know. And it's not only people from outside the community that's impacted that are coming together to help, but it's really those in the community coming together, you know, with whatever little they have, and sharing and rebuilding, you know. And it is so evident with groups in BURE that were helping on the ground. Yes, I mean, it's such a beautiful thing to see.
This conversation is really energizing me, and I'm sure it's energizing the people who are viewing our Talanoa tonight. So having talked about these things that you've just been talking about, what for you are some recommendations that you want to put forward? People are listening. We are preparing for COP26. What are some things that you think are important for us to start to think about now as a nation? Chris.
Paulo, one thing that's I've observed back in the village is the involvement of youth. Right now, we've in a long time we've elected a younger gentleman to head, and we've seen the support that has gone ahead. I don't mean to say anything bad against the elders. I mean, they are there. They're guiding the youths to in terms of the leadership and the involvement of youth. I've observed in the years I've lived in the village and while in Suva, I've noticed the change in leadership. We've given leadership to youth, how things have progressed when compared to the former forms of leadership. And I believe if we work with our youths, you know, enhance their capacity, their skills, from the relevant organizations to build it up so that they can take lead of addressing issues that communities face, and also in reaching out to rural, remote communities around Fiji. That is something our organization works on, but then there's a vast communities out there in Fiji that we have yet to reach out to. So that is something, one of the recommendations I would suggest.
Thank you. So those are two very important recommendations. I think the first one is not just about believing in the youth and the young people, but actually providing them and giving them the chances to be able to do that, because otherwise the older people will continue to take up those positions for leadership and all that. But it's believing them and giving them those opportunities to lead. Thank you. And then the reaching out to very remote communities that are usually forgotten. George.
350 Pacific has done work at COP23, and in the lead up to COP26, there's been an interest from young people to come together and have a gathering, you know, and I believe this will be launched next week or the following week. So please keep your ear to the ground of this gathering. But it's just an opportunity for young people to come together and voice their concerns on really thinking intentionally about the future that they deserve, and taking this collection of opinions, of demands to COP. I think it's an important thing for us young people to get involved, you know. One thing we use in our work is storytelling, and it's a big part of our culture, our history, storytelling. And if you can share your story, your truth, your experiences of what you are facing, you know, day in and day out because of the impacts of climate change, people out there are ready to hear you, you know. And yeah, I think that's one thing. Just continue to get involved in these spaces. Don't hesitate, you know. Just put yourself out there and share your truth.
Both of you seem to share the importance of involving young people, and you being young people yourselves understand the importance of involving young people. What do young people bring with them when they get involved in processes, in meetings, in areas that are not usually considered in our traditions, you know, fit for young people? So what do young people bring with them?
I think they bring a lot of innovation, creativity, just thinking outside the box is something that young people bring to the table. And I think a lot of passion, and that's important for the work, you know. You bring that passion and heart into the work, you'll be able to move things.
Thank you. Grace?
Yes, just picking up on what George said, the passion. As I've observed back in the village, how with the leadership of our young Turanganikoro, how he's able to gather the youth, and then in just a day they're able to conquer a lot of projects. So they have the passion, the drive, you know, to run such work. So if we give them the platform to push that further, I think they'll be able to do great things for us.
So unfortunately, time has caught up with us. We'll leave the Talanoa here, and it could be continued later on. But we take this opportunity on behalf of Transcend Oceania to thank both of you for your time and for sharing your thoughts and your opinions, and particularly your experiences and your passion as young people in this Talanoa. We hope it's been useful for you both, but we also hope that for those of you who have been listening in, this Talanoa has created a lot of ideas in terms of addressing the issues that we have, particularly with the issues of climate change. Thank you for joining us in this Talanoa.
As we conclude our JustPeace Talanoa BURE at COVID-19, we are reminded once again to enable people living just peace and nonviolence in Oceania and the Pacific, and here in Fiji. Let us rise together, engage in sense-making Talanoa, relearn and unlearn, leaving no one behind, and more so, be mindful and maintain safety protocol, mask up, home isolation may be tough, at the same time the need for health care, leaving no one behind, for inclusive peace, security, and safety with dignity amidst the changes and transitions we are going through, building just peace communities in changing environment and climate. I'm Adi Vasulevu at Transcend Oceania. Join us at the same time next week.